So today I'm going to show you the making of and sort of a tutorial on how I made my Magikarp armor. This is a little bit off the cuff. I've had this footage for months. So to start out with, I tried using a sharpened PVC pipe to individually cut my scales, and while this is great if you only need a few, I needed hundreds. And so I ended up giving up and just using my Cricut. My Cricut specifically is a Cricut Explore 1, and I just put a deep cut blade into it and set it on the highest pressure setting. For the Pauldrons, I self-drafted a pattern onto newsprint. This just took a few tries of sketching designs and then cutting them out and putting them together. I put some registration keys and I cut 8 copies of this. I just contact cemented the pieces together and matched up the registration keys. I tend to just use DAP contact cement. It's easy to find at Walmart, sticks together pretty well. And then I ended up just hot gluing the scales onto there. Took a little bit too much time to contact cement them, so hot glue it is. I used more contact cement here to attach details around the edges, so I have a thin piece of 2mm craft foam here for a base, and then over top of it I ended up putting a 5mm piece of EVA foam to add some more dimension and detail to the pauldron. After I attached all that, I just dremeled it. And here I used a 2mm piece of craft foam and some SKS Props foam clay to make the fins. And then I just used some contact cement to attach the ridges to the fins. And then I just used my Dremel to create some more detail. Now I made a really long snake of SKS Props foam clay, and then I just ended up hot gluing it around the edges of the pauldron. Didn't really want to wait for contact cement. And here are the finished pauldrons. Now the bracers were pretty simple. I just drew up a couple of construction paper patterns and held them up on my arms and legs to see how I wanted them to fit. I drew some fins onto 2mm craft foam and just went through the same process that I went through with the fins on the pauldrons. There were a few layers of detail work around the edges of the bracers, so here I am cutting some of that out of 2mm craft foam. And here are the pieces cut out of the 5mm EVA foam. This was just for the detail work around the edges, so I'm just drawing some lines. here I am adhering more scales to the bracers. And then I just cut off all the overhang on the edges. I just kind of sloppily cut around this, and then I later on used my Dremel to smooth it out a little bit more. And then I measured out the width of the borders, and I just cut off all of the excess scales that would get in the way of that, and then I used my Dremel a little bit to help get all that off. I laid down some of the border to check if I needed to cut off more, and then I contact cemented everything together. For the 5mm foam border, I just used hot glue because I got tired of waiting. And then I made the fins in the same way I made the other fins. My crown is just more 5mm foam on a headband. I ended up redoing this a couple of times, so I don't have the footage of the latest incarnation of it, other than this little fin part. And I used some SKS Props foam clay to make the, I guess, whiskers. Now for the breastplate, I used a Kamui Cosplay pattern, and I just followed that to a T. And then the only modification I really made to it was cutting off some of the lower half and cutting a design into it. Here I just used scissors because it was easier. Here I also used 2mm craft foam to put on some details, and some 5mm EVA to put on higher details after that. Here I am attaching the cups to the band after putting scales on the cups. And then I just Dremel the excess so it's a little bit more comfortable on my chest. For the Pokeball, I just used an old Pokeball I had made for another costume, put some Zebra over it, just to sort of trace it. And then on the back, I inserted some grommets so that I could tie the back closed. Here's more foam clay to add some details. The thigh guards were sort of similar to the bracers. I just kind of fooled around with a shape until I found one that I liked, and then added scales and craft foam as well as EVA foam details, and then I ended up attaching them to my thighs with elastic. And for the paint, I used a mixture of hand painting with acrylics and then using some airbrush to get a base down. I ended up actually not liking the airbrush primer. It wasn't opaque enough. So I ended up just using white paint and some white acrylic gesso to cover that up. I used Vallejo Game Air airbrush paints for this. Took a few layers, different oranges, and then obviously I ended up painting over all the white parts later to cover up any overspray. And then I also painted the raised details around the edges gold with acrylic paint.